Brilliance Audio presents Closing Time, the true story of the Looking for Mr. Goodbar murder, by Lacey Fosburgh, performed by Cynthia Farrell. The city was cold that night, and there was no moon. The berths along the Hudson were plated with ice, and wind careened down the streets and past the corners. The sky was clouded, without stars. It was the kind of night when no one should be outside, or alone. Oh, Jack, the news dealer on the corner of West 72nd Street and Broadway, remembered a large dog scruffing up and down, looking for a doorway. It came by every night, he said, a hound that had no home. Monday it shuffled down the street, hanging in close to the buildings as if to miss as much of the wind as possible. The Times delivery truck came by once, too, Oh, Jack said, but that was all, except for the dog. Over there, on Manhattan's west side, the streets were almost empty, and even 72nd Street, with its all-night delicatessens and places where egg rolls and soup cost less than $1, was deserted. It was too cold. No one stood on the corner reading the early editions or eating hot dogs. There were none of the usual junkies who leaned against the lamp-posts like forgotten canes, and there was no one in Needle Park, where for a decade or more, people found their versions of life in packets of white powder and a shivery sensation in the spine. It was the beginning of a new year, but the celebration was over. This was January 1st, and it was cold and quiet, and the only sound was an occasional taxicab or the subway underneath. Oh, Jack remembered the quiet because, blind in eyes, he dealt in the land of noise, and that night, he said, there was none except for the wind. The only action at his place was Long John's all-night talk show and the dog licking at his glove, and then the sound of him pushing up against the metal doorways as he went off down the block toward West End Avenue. Farther down in that direction, where the residential buildings began and the commercial places ended, was Tweed's Bar. It stood on the south side of 72nd Street near the corner of West End Avenue, and all that was visible of it from the street was the pair of steps heading down. Once there had been a window there, but long ago wooden planks were barricaded over the spot to keep out the cold and the thieves, and just now these planks shook in the wind like an old barn door. Inside, the wind was leaking through the cracks in the wood and hissing like steam in a radiator. The street was cold, but Tweed's was hot and crowded. A mist of smoke hung in the air like urban smog, and people, back to back, hip to hip, filled the small channel by the door between the bar and the jukebox. In the back, the tables in the long, narrow room were full, and by midnight the air was almost rancid. It smelled of liquor and smoke, hamburgers and sweat, and every now and then the scent of weed wafted through the crowd like a conversation faintly overheard. Joe Willie Simpson was there, drinking alone at the bar. Danny had gone home. He said he wanted to start the new year right. Joe Willie liked the sound of the noise and the feel of the glass. He sat on the stool at the far end, close to the cash register, and listened to the music and the voices in the room, and the words inside his head. His hair was blonde, his eyes blue, his face strong and bony. Afterward, no one remembered him. Catherine Cleary was there, too, drinking alone at the opposite end of the bar. Her long red hair covered much of her face, and her eyes were serious. She may have wished, as she often did, that everything could be different for her, and that she had something like a white lace gown or a penthouse in the sky where people came to dinner. She sat in the dim shadows of the bar. The pretty profile of her pale face stood out against the dark walls behind her, and she must have looked a bit like a child. In a while, she would move out into the crowd. She didn't want to be alone, but now she was just holding her glass and listening to the noise.